All right, I'm getting ready to start fitting the new subframe under the car. So I'm doing the subframe shuffle today. I had both subframes out here, so I figured I'd take a video kind of comparing the two with the engines on it and everything like that. Obviously the original one is on the left, and with the ZZ4 350 iron block crate engine, and the new Speedtech Extreme subframes on the right with the LS3 based 415 stroker. And yeah, you can kind of get a sense. I'm still a little concerned about hood clearance. There's not a whole lot of room above the pancake air cleaner on the left, and it may be slightly taller on the right. So we'll have to wait and see what I'm gonna have to do about hood clearance. But just do a quick walk around and we'll start trying to fit things up. See what kind of modifications or massaging with a hammer we have to do to the transmission tunnel to make all this fit. You can see how much bigger in the background the T56 is compared to the ST10 right there. So yeah, this is going to be it's going to be a tight fit. Here's the comparison from the back. All right, here's the moment of truth. We're gonna go ahead and roll the subframe engine transmission back in the unibody of the car and see how much damage there is that needs to be done. Highly unlikely that I'm gonna get away without having to modify the transmission tunnel. But even if it does all fit perfectly, this is just a dry fit. It's just going to be to make sure that everything does fit smoothly. I don't need to make any adjustments. I can adjust the engine position forward and aft. I can adjust the incidence of the engine by raising the tail end of the transmission up and down. So figure all that stuff out, and then once that's all laying flat, it'll be pulled out and ready to paint the underside and paint the firewall black before this all has to go back in again. All right, here it is, almost in place. It's right about where it should be, but the body is still about probably 3 or 4 inches off the body pucks at this point. Again, I was crossing my fingers. I didn't have to do any work inside, but I think I will. Just a quick walk around to you can see this is where one of the body mounts is. Here's my aluminum body mount. So it's still got about 3 or 4 inches to go. Same thing back there. 3 or 4 inches to go there. Looks like we're gonna have plenty of room to the firewall, no question there. So I probably could actually bring the engine back a little bit on the adjustable engine mounts. Right down there, you can actually slide that piece back a little bit. So that'll get center of gravity a little closer to center. But as you can see, it actually fits pretty well. Looks like it's going to work. I don't think I'm going to get away without having to modify the transmission tunnel, and I'll show you why. On the other side of the lift here. If we look in here, we can see this is the original spot where the shifter came through, and here's the top of the plate that covers the whole shift mechanism. And this is only about 1 inch more in there. So the whole car needs to come down about 3 inches, but I've only got about 1 inch of clearance here. So I had originally raised the tail end of the transmission up a little bit to a higher hole than they had recommended, because it was confusing, because they had suggested a hole that was causing the engine incidence to be steeper than they themselves had suggested. So the instructions were disagreeing with each other a little bit, and I guess if I had used the original location, the original lower hole, maybe it would have fit, but I still think I'd be having to modify this piece right here. So I'm going to have to do some figuring on this to try to do some complex calculus to figure out, you know, what I need to do to get all the angles of the engine and angles of the drive line straight, to figure out exactly what I need to modify. I suspect I'm going to have to come back in here and actually build a hole cover or get a kind of a pre-manufactured piece to lay in there and end up cutting the whole top of this transmission tunnel out. But I have to do some figuring.
Here's a shot from under the car. You can see there's the top of the shift plate there, and there's the tail housing of the transmission. If you look down this side and you look down this side, you'll see that the width of the transmission tunnel is actually not bad. I don't think I'm gonna have to widen it at all. It's just the height is not quite enough. And you can see this plate here in the center is adjustable up and down, and I have it adjusted about halfway up when it was supposed to be fully dropped according to the instructions. I still don't think dropping it fully would only gather me about 1 inch, and I need about probably 2 inches to make it clear without having to modify the transmission tunnel. But the other thing I'm worried about is the top of this tail housing has to pass underneath this little arch right here, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of clearance remaining when I drop this down. I have, I think, 1/2 inch shorter body bushings from when I had, from before I put the Extreme suspension on there, and I don't think that's going to work out. I think I need to build that back up, so I may end up either putting a washer on top of that or dropping this down a little bit just to get a little bit more clearance on this tail housing so that the drive shaft doesn't get so close to that arch. All right, back under the car, I rolled out the subframe and I took this box right here, which is kind of the centerpiece of the crossmember, and I dropped it down. The bottom of this was up here, so by dropping it down, I gained probably about 1 inch. Dropped the tail of the transmission 1 inch. I think when eventually this gets in place, this is going to help this clearance right here, which I really didn't want to have to cut into this frame member here. But it still isn't good enough because I've got the front of the car sitting on 2-inch blocks right now, meaning that it's going to need probably another 2 inches of tunnel above it. And so I think we're going to have to do some more sheet metal work before this is all said and done. Back inside the car now. So I've cleaned around this stamped transmission hump, this shifter hump. Used the spot weld driller and the little ball carbide burr, just like I did on the firewall, and now I can take this off. So now I've got a much bigger hole to work with, so I'm going to roll the subframe back under here, drop the car down, and I'm probably going to have to cut it at least back here some more. And I hopefully don't have to cut it so far back that I get into that structural arch here. But what I've got to cover it is this guy, which is a much bigger hump from Hooker. Got this one from Summit. But basically it's just a much larger version of this. So once I kind of get the hole cut and get it so it fits in, I can use this to kind of position it over here and do some welding just like I did on the firewall to weld that in. Much cleaner and faster, well worth the money to buy that stamped piece of metal. All right, here's the top of the transmission. Dropped into place. It's still about 1.5 inches or so higher than it needs to be. So we got good clearance all the way around here. Some up here, it'll still need to be cut because there's not 1.5 inches in there. But the real problem is right here. This sort of round casting piece extends back, and I believe this is a piece to hold the rear bearing for the internal shift linkage, and that extends back probably to about here. So I'm definitely going to have to come back and cut this here, and I'm going to try to get this to the point where this drops in, and then I can use that to kind of set where this is going to sit, because I'm going to bring this basically as far forward as I can and still allow clearance. And then I'll scribe a line up in there and cut that as far forward as I can. And that's how we're going to attack it. Whew. Okay, well, I've cut the hole. There's the hump in place. I've made the hole as big as I can, so there it is. The problem is that it's no longer little corners and bits on the transmission that are running into the tunnel. The whole top of the transmission is just smack up against the inside of the tunnel. So counter to what American Powertrain said, it said you might rarely require some modification of the hump. Yeah, no, we're gonna have to cut up the whole transmission tunnel. So yeah, now I guess I just gotta do some more cutting. Whew, boy. Just to give you a sense of the level of frustration I'm dealing with trying to get this transition to fit,
I started with this guy, and then I went to that guy, 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 and I finally ended up with that guy. And it's just not gonna fit. So, what I've done is, this is the original piece that I was gonna try to make it work. This is what I'm gonna try to use now. This is the transmission tunnel modification kit from Speedtech. Now, Speedtech has this listed as a first gen transmission tunnel. They told me it would work for the second gen. And when I placed it in there, it will work for the second gen, but the second gen tunnel is very round. So it's gonna require a lot more of that guy to get the round tunnel to fit tightly with the square top they've given me. So I think there's gonna be many more hours of hammering and choice words. All right, I cut a little bit more out. The front of the hole used to be right there where those two bolts were, pretty much. Brought it significantly further forward. I'm keeping it narrow. I'm just taking little bits at a time because I really don't want to end up having to patch more than I need to. The front body pucks are on their mounts right now. The rears are still an inch off, so the tail end of the transmission has to come up another inch before everything is mounted, and you can't really see it, but up in there, there's a couple of bolt pad ears on the front of the transmission that are essentially touching the tunnel right now. So more cutting in store. Okay, we have success. So you can see there's the hole. I widened it down here 1 inch because it needed to be a little bit wider to fit the side of the transmission when it tucked up in there. And if you look up under there, you'll see, aside from a lot of bell housing, you can now see that those two ears, that one right there and that one right there, which were the things that I was that were touching the transmission, now fit. Now I'm going to come back in here where the seam is with the hammer and try to beat this transmission tunnel out and beat that out that way. That's going to give me a little bit more room, and it's also going to hopefully help this whole thing fit this better, which is square, as we talked about before. So for all you guys out there looking to put a T56 in a second gen, I think you can do it without significant modification. You can definitely use that small stamped hump piece that I got to make it work, but you will probably have to drop the tail end of the transmission down fairly significantly to make it work, and then you're probably going to have problems with getting your drive shaft alignment because the engine incidence is going to be fairly steep. So honestly, you know, you could make that work. I don't think it would work out very well. Maybe somebody else had better success than I, but here we are. That is how much I ended up having to cut. So now a lot of metal working to see if we can get this cover to fit. Quick check-in on the metalworking. The top of the transmission tunnel was kind of a trapezoid shape with a fairly sharp angle all the way down. And now you can see that it's starting to get a bit of a round profile. Now, full disclosure, I've had about a sum total of 2 hours of sheet metal beating and forming training. So I don't have any of the appropriate tools, but we're making it work. So what I've done is I've used some old cornhole bags you got here to substitute for like a metal forming bag. And because it's 16 gauge, I don't have any wood mallets, which you normally would use for the thinner stuff. But because it's 16 gauge, I'm using my hand sledge, and I'm able to put the piece of metal here and work it against these cornhole bags. And actually, I'm getting some success. So I still need to keep taking this down. This essentially needs to be turned from this trapezoidal shape into a completely round shape to flush with the transmission tunnel in the front. So I'm going to keep working on that. All right, here's the shot from under the car. See, I've got some marks where I need to use the hammer liberally again, down here, down there. One thing I wanted to point out, this may need some material added on, and this isn't something that I cut. This is the stamped hole where the factory transmission shifter hump was. So I may be able to get some weight on top of this and shove it down, and that may get this lip, but these holes are where you're supposed to do little rosette welds, so you can tell that it ain't gonna work on that side. I may be able to do a little seam weld down here to avoid having to rebuild this, but this time that wasn't my mistake. That's just how it works out. All right, the subframe and the transmission are all bolted into place, so everything is at the correct height.
I went ahead and cut a small hole right there to pop the shifter through. I think I'm gonna have to go ahead and make that larger because there's a larger pad underneath of that, and if I shift in a second, it just touches the top of this tunnel. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this out, kind of a rectangle shape, and I'm gonna push the tunnel down to allow this to clear that extra little shifter bit. Bonus of that is I may not have to end up adding metal back here, because I should be able to, with another 1/2 inch or so, I should be able to shove it down and then seam weld it. So a little bit more work here, and then we'll take it off. The metal forming activities went really well. You can't really see it, I'll show it later, but actually it fits really nicely, so that worked out well. This piece was supposed to go on the end here, and it was supposed to go kind of inside and be welded from the inside out, but as you can see, it ain't gonna work. So this piece was flat, first of all, on the base, and this is clearly curved. So yeah, I don't know what they were smoking, but this was never gonna work on a 2nd gen. So I'll probably still use it. It's a little wide, so I'll probably use this top tab, cut these ears off narrower, and then I may come in and cut a radius right here so that it sits. Now, because I won't have the tabs, I'll probably end up TIGging it, but that's no big deal. So I will reuse that piece of metal, but it ain't gonna be work. It ain't gonna work without significant modification.
I'm in the middle of welding the tunnel cap up, and I wanted to give a quick science lesson. There's the outside of the weld, which looks nice and shiny because I've hit it with the wire brush to keep it clean. But if we look at the inside, I hadn't been wire brushing the inside, and the weld doesn't look great because it wasn't protected by the shielding gas because it wasn't back purged. But what I really wanted to point out was this coloration. These kind of like tan colors, and then this blue ribbon and this kind of steel gray. This is a heat affected zone, and it kind of tells you how hot the metal got as you were working along. So this kind of light straw color is like about 400 degrees. These blues tend to be like 500, getting on 600 degrees. This kind of blue steel gray here is closer to 700, and then over in here, this is obviously where it melted, so it was much hotter. The faster you weld, the less heat you put into the material, and the smaller this heat affected zone is. So just something I thought I'd point out while I had it here, nice and easy to see. And here's the completed piece, all done. So as I showed before, I've got this curved section, which I ended up using those cornhole bags as like makeshift metal forming bags, and that worked out pretty well. I welded in a pie slice here and one over here as well. And then this is the hole I ended up cutting. This is just an enlarged size of the same shape that was hiding under that cover before. So when this is on the car, there'll be a rectangular piece that pops up through here. And in the back, I did exactly what I thought I was going to have to do. I cut the side ears off of that plate they gave me and just TIG welded around the side. I still left the top tab, which is tucked underneath, and I ended up having to cut this radius. But it all fits really nicely. It's all TIGged in, so now it's time to put it in the car. Here it is, last fit check before it gets welded in. You can see how the plate turned out there. It turned out really nice. The shifter is actually going to move up another inch or so because the rear bolt holes that bolt the subframe in aren't bolted in. So that's going to actually come up. So this piece will be proud of the surface of this. There's some gap here, but basically I'm going to weld it where it touches, then I'm going to go underneath and push it so that it touches. That'll probably be a 2-person job. And then tack it, and then use some seam sealer or something. Like I said before, if you look up under here where I had done some metal work, it now fits nice and smooth. Not very easy to see, but it all seems to fit. And it's tacked in place now. I got a couple of tacks here, one there, and then a couple along the top edge. And I'd already gone under and started tacking, and I'll show you that in just a moment. So here's what it looks like underneath. It looks a lot nicer now than it did in terms of fitment. The edges where I'd cut, these factory edges here and up here and all this around, were all flared in. They had a big gap between the actual panel, the new panel, and the old floor panel. And so what I did was, part of that was because it was all kind of cupped in. And so I came in and I used a cutoff wheel, and I slid it here and here and here. I did the same over here and here and here. And what that allowed me to do was take my hammer and kind of bend the flanges flush up against this plate, which is on the inside of it. And so that kind of allowed me to kind of, what I did is started in the front middle, pushed it up, took a piece of metal, pushed it until it touched, and tacked it. And then I started working my way around, pushing it until it touched, and then tacking it. And I was able to work all the way down that side and all the way down that side. And now there's, you know, a millimeter or two of gap all the way around, except for the back where we knew it wasn't going to fit. So that actually worked really well, just to kind of come in and work it piece by piece. Whenever the metal started to wrinkle, because I was trying to push it out and it was curved, I just slid it. And when I get it all done and verified fitment, I'm going to go in and I'll seam weld that all up. So, and then we have to just go inside and tack through the little rosette welds. And here it is all completed. So I've gone back and I've added some more welds around the outside, and I've closed up these places where I slid it, there and there, there and there. So it's all pushed out, it's all in place, it ain't going anywhere. I would hate to have to take this thing out. And here's the finished product on the inside. You can see I finished up the rosette welds, added some more seams around this side. You might be wondering what that white crap was that was there in a couple of last shots, but isn't there now. That was just some weld-through primer that I put on the surfaces that we're going to touch. So there was at least a little bit of protection inside the weld seam. But I cleaned all the excess stuff of that off, and I'll be painting it with the same paint that I used on the firewall. So, done.